I want you to picture a scenario. You're sitting on a very comfortable, very expensive leather couch in a dimly lit room.
Yeah, the classic therapy setup.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Across from you is a person with a notepad, nodding empathetically, holding, a couple of advanced degrees framed on the wall behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And you are just pouring your heart out. You're detailing your anxieties, your relationship patterns, your childhood traumas. And as you sit there, you are probably operating under a deeply comforting illusion.
Oh, it is a beautiful fantasy. It really is.
Right. You believe that the study of the mind, psychology, psychiatry, whatever label you want to slap on it, is this pristine, perfectly mapped out medical science.
You think you've basically brought your brain to a mechanic.
Yes. You think they're going to, pop the hood, find the broken spark plug, and just fix it with a targeted behavioral therapy or a precisely synthesized chemical.
Which is incredibly reassuring when you're in distress. I mean, the idea that we have the human mind entirely figured out and quantified.
But the reality is a completely different animal. If you actually look under the hood of psychology, you don't find a sterile, predictable engine.
No, not at all.
You find a chaotic, highly sophisticated, centuries-old philosophical clusterfuck.
That is the perfect word for it.
So the question we are tearing into today for this deep dive is psychology actually a rigorous science? Or are we just dressing up ancient existential debates in modern lab coats?
And that is the ultimate question of the field. Because the moment you pull back the curtain on how humanity has historically studied human behavior, that pristine medical illusion just shatters.
It totally falls apart.
It does. The entire foundation of what we think we know about ourselves is built on some of the most messy, brutal, and, mind-bending intellectual wars in human history.
So we are going to trace those wars today.
Yeah.
We're going all the way from ancient Greek mathematical mystics who literally worship numbers to Renaissance intellectual anarchists, right up to the birth of the modern scientific method.
It's a wild ride.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear with you listening, this isn't just a tour of dusty old books. We are taking a crowbar to the literal operating system of your own brain.
We have to, because before we can even begin to debate what a thought is or where an emotion comes from, we have this massive logistical problem.
Right. Like, how do we even look back in the first place?
Exactly. We have to figure out how to look backward without totally corrupting the data. I mean, think about human memory.
Oh, it's terrible.
You probably can't objectively remember what you had for breakfast 3 days ago without introducing some kind of bias or fabrication.
Wait, that's a terrifying starting point. If I can't even trust my own memory, how do historians judge the past without just projecting their own modern baggage onto it?
It is a constant, agonizing struggle in historiography. When you study the history of ideas, you're generally forced to choose between two opposing lenses, presentism and historicism.
Okay, break those down for me.
So, presentism is an incredibly tempting trap. It's the attempt to understand the past by evaluating it strictly through the lens of today's modern knowledge.
Like using our current standards as the ultimate measuring stick.
Yes, our current morals, our current scientific paradigms.
It sounds like pure chronological snobbery, honestly.
That's exactly what it is.
It's us sitting here with our smartphones, our fMRI brain scanners, and our mapped human genome, looking back at scholars from the 16th century and thinking, wow, what a bunch of fucking idiots.
Right, like why didn't they just discover neurotransmitters?
Yeah, why were they talking about humors and animal spirits?
And that is the exact danger of presentism. It constructs history as this clean, linear, triumphant narrative where everything in the past was just a pathetic, fumbling, rough draft of our current glorious state of enlightenment.
That feels super unfair to the people back then.
It creates massive anachronisms. You end up unfairly diminishing profoundly brilliant thinkers because they simply lacked the conceptual and technological tools we happen to possess right now.
Okay, it's like judging a Roman architect as a complete failure because they didn't use structural steel.
They didn't have steel.
Right. They built the Pantheon with unreinforced concrete, which is arguably a greater display of genius given their constraints.
That's a perfect analogy. So to avoid that snobbery, you pivot to the other lens, which is historicism.
And what does historicism demand?
It demands that we look at the past strictly within its own messy, backward cultural context. You study the past for its own sake, attempting to completely wall off your modern scientific knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we look at a 14th century plague doctor wearing that terrifying bird mask stuffed with flowers.
A classic image.
Presentism says this guy is a quack who doesn't understand germ theory. Historicism says, We need to view this doctor as a product of a world that genuinely logically believed in miasma, bad air, and divine punishment.
Yes, historicism preserves the authenticity of the intellectual environment. It forces you to ask, given what this person knew and the culture they lived in, was there ideological?
Okay, I like that better. But even if you manage to pick a historical lens and stick to it, you run into the next massive roadblock, don't you?
You do. What actually drives history forward? When human knowledge takes a massive leap, what caused it?
This is where we get into the hero worship stuff, right?
Essentially, yes. This is the debate between the great person theory and the Zeitgeist theory. The great person approach posits that history is fundamentally just the biography of freakish, singular geniuses.
Lone wolves.
Exactly. It argues that progress happens because individuals like Plato, Descartes, Darwin, or Freud are born. This view suggests that these exceptional, once-in-a-generation intellects single-handedly grab the trajectory of human knowledge and physically bend it through sheer force of will.
I push back on that so hard. That is exactly how modern tech culture operates, and it drives me absolutely crazy.
What do you mean?
We act like Steve Jobs just magically manifested in a sterile white room and invented the smartphone entirely out of his own imagination.
Ignoring everything else around him.
Completely. It ignores the massive socio-political, economic, and technological foundation that had to be laid down over decades by thousands of unnamed engineers. The touchscreen, the cellular networks, the battery technology, all of that was gestating.
You are naturally leaning toward the Zeitgeist theory, then. Zeitgeist translates from German as the spirit of the times.
Spirit of the times, I like that.
This approach argues that broad developments in other sciences, shifting political climates and economic conditions, coalesce to create an environment that is practically pregnant with specific ideas. The culture dictates the discovery.
So meaning if Steve Jobs had never been born, we would still have smartphones today.
Yeah.
Someone else would have put the pieces together because the culture and the technology were practically screaming for it.
That is the core of the Zeitgeist argument. Take Charles Darwin.
Okay.
The theory of evolution by natural selection wasn't formed in a vacuum. The intellectual environment of the 19th century demanded it.
Wait, wasn't there another guy working on it too?
Yes. Alfred Russel Wallace was coming up with the exact same theory of evolution at the exact same time, completely independently of Darwin.
That's why.
Why did that happen? Because the Zeitgeist was ready for it. The data was there. If Einstein hadn't existed, the Zeitgeist dictates someone else would have formulated relativity because the global physics community was already crashing violently into the limitations of Newtonian mechanics.
So who wins that debate? Is it the singular genius or is it the invisible hand of the culture?
Modern historians generally rely on the eclectic approach, which is this nuanced synthesis. It recognizes that historical causality is infinitely multidimensional.
A bit of both then.
Right. Most of the time, the spirit of the times produces great individuals. But every so often, a freakishly great individual really does come along and violently shift the spirit of their times. You cannot fully remove the genius, nor can you ignore the soil they grew in.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I'm a listener trying to understand my own anxiety or why I act the way I do, why does any of this history matter?
It's a fair question.
Why do I need to care about the zeitgeist of the 1800s to understand my brain today?
You have to care because you need to understand the absolute foundations of our current dogmas.
Dogmas? Like what?
Well, a shocking amount of what we casually consider hard, indisputable facts in modern psychology are actually philosophical assumptions that are hundreds of years old. We've just forgotten that they're assumptions.
Oh, wow. So we just treat them as truth.
Exactly. Secondly, we study this to avoid repeating cyclical, faddish mistakes.
Though psychology is notoriously faddish.
Incredibly so. If you don't know the history, every single new psychological trend feels like a revolutionary breakthrough. But often, it's just an old, thoroughly debunked idea wrapped up in slick new corporate jargon.
That makes a lot of sense.
And perhaps most importantly, we study history to resurrect brilliant ideas that were abandoned. There are profound concepts from centuries ago that were thrown out simply because the technology to test them didn't exist yet. The thinkers were entirely correct, their timing was just tragic.
All right, so if history is this incredibly fluid, highly subjective, messy discipline, how did humanity ever decide what counts as hard science?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because when you look at the origins of psychology, some of the most towering intellectual heavyweights in human history looked at the study of the mind and declared it complete and utter bullshit.
They absolutely did. The early haters of psychology were legendary. You have foundational figures of science and philosophy like Galileo and Immanuel Kant flat out claiming that psychology could never, ever be a legitimate science.
Really?
Never. Never. It wasn't just difficult to them, it was philosophically impossible.
Let's start with Galileo. The guy essentially birthed modern physics. Why was he so hostile toward the mind?
Galileo's entire paradigm was built on the belief that true science requires physical, mathematical measurement.
Okay.
For him, science was strictly about objective physical realities in the external world. Things you can weigh, things you can measure with a ruler, objects where you can calculate the exact velocity and trajectory.
But the mind, conscious experience, that is inherently subjective.
Exactly. You cannot put a physical ruler to a feeling of existential dread. You cannot calculate the mass of a childhood memory.
I see the logic there.
Therefore, Galileo argued, because you cannot apply mathematics to consciousness, it cannot be a science.
He wants hard data. But what about Kant? Immanuel Kant's philosophy is notoriously dense. Why did he think studying the mind was impossible?
Kant's argument is an absolute mindfuck, and it centers on the problem of introspection. Kant argued that the human mind inherently imposes its own categories, filters, and biases onto reality whenever it observes anything.
So we never see the real world.
Right. You never see the raw universe. You only see the universe after your brain has heavily processed it.
Our senses are basically flawed translators.
Exactly. So Kant argued, if you try to make the mind turn inward to objectively observe itself, you hit a devastating logical fallacy.
Because the tool observing is the thing being observed.
Yes. The tool you are using to observe is the very thing being observed. It's like trying to bite your own teeth or trying to see your own eyeball without a mirror.
Oh, man.
If you try to analyze your feeling of anger, the you doing the analyzing is currently being warped by the anger. It is a closed feedback loop. You can never achieve the objective distance required for true science.
That is infuriatingly logical. It feels like an inescapable trap. If Galileo says we need physical math and Kant says we can't ever be objective about our own thoughts, how does modern psychology even justify its existence? What is the actual formula for something to be called a science today?
To bypass those traps, traditional science demands the synthesis of two major components, empirical observation and scientific theory.
Okay, let's look at empirical observation first.
Empirical observation dictates that the ultimate final authority is sensory data. What can we publicly see, hear, and measure? But raw data is totally useless on its own.
Right, a pile of heart rate measurements means nothing without context.
Precisely. You need a framework to hang the data on. That's the second component, scientific theory. The theory provides the rational, logical framework to organize that raw data and, most importantly, generate testable predictions.
So you need both.
You need the empiricism to gather the cold facts and the rationalism to make sense of them. And crucially, as you alluded to, it must be public.
It can't just be me meditating on a mountain claiming I had a vision of how the hippocampus works.
No. Public, verifiable observation is the bedrock. Independent researchers across the globe must be able to replicate your experiment and get the exact same sensory data.
To strip away the personal bias.
Exactly. That public verification is what strips away individual biases and separates rigorous science from mysticism. The ultimate goal of combining theory and observation is to establish scientific laws.
But in psychology, distinguishing between the types of laws we find is where the real agony happens, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We are constantly caught between correlational laws and causal laws.
Let's break those down. What is the practical difference for the listener?
A correlational law simply describes how two events systematically vary together. It tells you they are connected, but it absolutely does not prove that one directly causes the other.
Give me an example.
For instance, we have a massive, robustly documented correlation between experiencing severe emotional stress in early childhood and having chronically heightened cortisol levels as an adult. They move together consistently.
But we can't say the childhood stress mechanically caused the cortisol spike, because maybe there's, I don't know, a genetic factor that makes someone both more susceptible to childhood stress and also predisposed to high cortisol. We don't know the exact mechanism.
Exactly. You are identifying a third variable. That is the weakness of correlational laws. A causal law, however, is the holy grail of science.
What does that look like?
It specifies exactly how events are directly related, detailing the mechanical chain of events. Knowing a causal law allows for precise prediction and behavioral control.
So a causal law would be pharmacology.
Yes. A causal law is knowing that administering a 20-milligram dose of a specific SSRI will causally result in the prolonged presence of serotonin in the synaptic cleft of the brain.
Because we can track the physical path.
We know this because we have mapped the exact mechanical pathway the drug takes to block the reabsorption of the neurotransmitter. The chemical physically obstructs the receptor. That is cause and effect.
But trying to find true, purely causal laws for complex human behavior is almost impossibly difficult.
Because humans are chaotic, walking messes of variables. Which brings us to Freud.
Right. Freud had a specific term for why human behavior is so hard to pin down.
He did. He called it overdetermination. Freud, for all his controversies, astutely noted that human behavior is almost never caused by one single isolated event.
Never just one thing.
Almost never. Any given action, any thought, any pathology is overdetermined. It is the result of a massive, chaotic, intersecting web of variables.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think of it this way. Imagine a massive, catastrophic flood wipes out a town. Trying to isolate a single cause for a human behavior is like standing in the wreckage of that town, looking at the water, and trying to figure out which exact raindrop caused the flood.
Oh, that's good.
You can't do it. The flood is overdetermined by millions of raindrops. The soil density, the temperature, the wind. When you snap at your partner over breakfast, is it because you have repressed childhood trauma? Is it because you slept poorly? Is it because your blood sugar is low? Is it because of a genetic predisposition toward irritability?
It's all of them.
It's all of them crashing together at once.
That raindrop analogy captures the nightmare of psychological research perfectly. What's fascinating here is how it forces us to confront a massive philosophical assumption underlying all of this determinism.
Define determinism for us.
Determinism is the belief that absolutely everything that happens has a strict, observable physical cause. If we push the domino, the next one falls.
But do scientists just blindly assume determinism is real? Because if the human mind is as complex as a flood, maybe determinism is just a comforting bedtime story scientists tell themselves.
That is a fierce debate. Some argue determinism is an earned assumption. The logic is, as we have studied nature over centuries, we consistently find lawful, predictable patterns where there used to be mystery.
Like tracking the stars.
Right. We figured out planetary orbits, we mapped the genome, we split the atom. Therefore, scientists logically induce that the rest of the universe, including the murky depths of human behavior, must also operate on similar causal laws. We simply haven't built the tools to map them yet.
But wait. If human behavior is really that tangled, and isolating a pure cause and effect is like finding a specific raindrop, then maybe this whole old-school view of pristine, objective science is totally naive.
Some certainly thought so.
Because in the 20th century, a group of rebel philosophers came along and basically threw a hand grenade into the pristine laboratory, didn't they?
They completely dismantled it. They looked at the traditional view that science is just passively gathering objective facts until a truth emerges, and they called it a myth.
Who was leading that charge?
The biggest instigator of this intellectual riot was Karl Popper.
Popper is fascinating. He essentially looked at the entire scientific community and accused them of massive systemic confirmation bias.
He did. Popper argued that the very idea of wandering around making passive, objective observations is a total fiction. You cannot just observe. You always have a theory in mind first.
Right, like what are you even looking at?
Exactly. If I tell you to just go observe, your first question has to be, observe what? You can't even know what data to look for unless you already have a theoretical framework guiding your eyes.
But Popper's most profound, destructive contribution to the philosophy of science was the principle of falsifiability, wasn't it?
Yes, falsifiability is the ultimate litmus test for what we consider real science today. Popper stated that for any theory to be considered legitimate science, it must make incredibly risky predictions.
It has to put itself on the line.
It has to stick its neck out and explicitly state, if X happens during my experiment, my theory is fundamentally wrong. A theory that is broad and vague enough to explain literally every possible outcome actually explains nothing at all.
It's like astrology. A horoscope says, you will face a challenge today, but overcome it with inner strength.
Right.
If you get a flat tire, the astrologer says, see? A challenge. If you don't get a flat tire, they say, see? Your inner strength prevented the challenge. It cannot be proven wrong.
Exactly. This is why Popper absolutely eviscerated the concept of post-addiction, which is trying to retroactively explain a phenomenon after it has already occurred. And he went after early psychoanalysis specifically for this.
Let's talk about that, because Freud and his followers were arguably the most dominant force in psychology at the time.
Yeah.
How did Popper dismantle them?
Popper observed that psychoanalysts would sit with a patient, observe their behavior, and no matter what the patient did, the analyst could retroactively mold the data to perfectly fit Freudian theory.
Give me a specific example.
If a man pushed a child into a river, the psychoanalyst would say he was driven by deeply repressed aggressive trauma. But if a different man sacrificed his own life to jump into the river and save the child, the psychoanalyst would say he had successfully sublimated that exact same repressed trauma into a heroic act.
So no matter what human behavior actually occurs, the theory is always right. It is completely unfalsifiable.
Yes, and to Popper, that meant it wasn't science. It was pseudoscience. For Popper, scientific theories are never, ever proven true. They are just temporarily surviving.
Just surviving the gauntlet.
The highest compliment you can give a scientific theory in a Popperian world is that it is not yet disconfirmed.
It's just surviving for one more day until a better theory kills it. But then you have Thomas Kuhn. And Kuhn didn't just look at the logic of science, he looked at the sociology of it. He looked at scientists as a deeply flawed, tribal group of humans.
Kuhn was a visionary. He published The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and he introduced a word that has been horribly abused by corporate buzzword culture ever since the paradigm. Oh, yes, the dreaded paradigm shift.
But Kuhn meant it seriously. A paradigm is a deeply shared set of cult-like assumptions, core values, and strict methodologies that an entire scientific community operates under without questioning.
Okay.
Kuhn argued that science does not evolve in a smooth, linear accumulation of facts. It operates in violent, distinct stages.
Let's walk through the stages, because when you read Kuhn, it feels less like a description of noble scientific inquiry and more like a description of being trapped in a soul-crushing corporate job.
That is a remarkably accurate way to view his concept of normal science. Once a paradigm is established, scientists enter the normal science phase.
Think about being in a cubicle. The CEO, the paradigm, has set the rules, the dress code, the goals. You sit down, you get your coffee, and you fill out your TPS reports perfectly within the margins provided. You aren't inventing a new business model. You aren't questioning the foundation of capitalism. You are just doing tedious, hyper-focused puzzle solving within the rigid rules the company gave you. And scientists will furiously protect that corporate culture. They will actively reject anything that threatens the paradigm. But eventually, while doing all that tedious puzzle solving, they start uncovering anomalies.
What's an anomaly in this context?
An anomaly is a persistent, undeniable, empirical observation that the current paradigm simply cannot explain. At first, the scientific community acts like middle management. They ignore the anomalies, they call them measurement errors, they sweep them under the rug.
But the anomalies keep piling up. The math stops working.
Exactly. And when the anomalies reach a critical mass, the entire system fractures. The corporate structure goes bankrupt. This period of intense crisis is resolved by a violent intellectual revolution where a new paradigm completely overthrows the old one.
That is a true paradigm shift.
It is a fundamental restructuring of how we see the universe.
So where does psychology sit in Kuhn's framework? Have we had a paradigm shift? Are we in normal science, just filling out psychological TPS reports?
According to Kuhn, no. Modern psychology is largely stuck in the preparadigmatic stage. Or, to be more generous, you could call it multi-paradigmatic. It has no single unifying theory that all scientists agree upon.
It's a beautifully chaotic Wild West. You have cognitive neuroscientists scanning brains, you have radical behaviorists treating humans like input-output machines, and you have psychoanalysts diving into dream interpretation.
And they all think the other factions are totally full of shit.
Exactly. It is deeply fractured. Which brings us to the ultimate rebel of scientific philosophy, Paul Feyerabend. If psychology is a chaotic Wild West, Feyerabend is the guy standing on the saloon bar handing out dynamite.
Feyerabend promoted something called epistemological anarchism.
What does that actually mean?
Feyerabend argued that the very idea of a strict universal scientific method is a fairy tale, and a dangerously restrictive one. He looked at history and saw that massive leaps in human knowledge rarely happened by strictly following the rules.
So the rules hold us back.
He argued that strict methodologies inhibit true imagination. His famous assertion was that for true scientific progress to occur, the rules must be continuously broken. His actual motto was, anything goes.
So we have a field with no unified paradigm. We have epistemological anarchists telling us to break all the rules. And because of this chaos, Psychology is haunted by a set of massive, unresolved, terrifying questions.
The persistent mindfucks.
Yes. And the biggest one, the one that keeps people up at night, is whether you, the listener, are actually in control of your own life. Are you an independent agent, or are you just a highly complex meat robot?
The debate over determinism versus free will is the pulsing, bleeding heart of psychology's identity crisis. If psychology desperately wants to be accepted as a hard science, it has to lean heavily on determinism.
Right.
The strict belief that all human behavior is caused by prior events entirely outside of personal control. But determinism comes in several distinct and, frankly, oppressive flavors.
Let's run through the flavors.
Yeah.
If I am a meat robot, who or what is programming me?
First, you have biological determinism. This argues that your physiological makeup, your genetic predispositions, and millions of years of evolutionary history are dictating your behavior.
So is my DNA.
Yes. You might think you are choosing a partner based on their personality, but biological determinism argues your genes are simply driving you toward optimal reproductive fitness based on pheromones and symmetry.
Okay, that's flavor one. Genes. What else?
Then there is environmental determinism. This strips away the internal and focuses on the external. It argues that external stimuli and your entire past history of reinforcements, every reward and punishment you've ever received since birth, are the primary causes of your actions.
Yeah.
You aren't making choices, you are just a complex calculation of past conditioning. Sociocultural determinism expands on this, arguing that the cultural customs, economic systems, and societal rules you are embedded in govern your behavior so deeply you can't even perceive the strings.
Those all sound like physical chains, measurable external things.
There are forms of physical determinism, but then you have psychical determinism, which is the Freudian nightmare.
The unconscious drives.
Exactly. This stresses that human behavior is strictly determined by internal mental events. But crucially, these are deeply unconscious drives, repressed traumas, and primitive conflicts that you aren't even aware of. Your conscious mind is just a puppet rationalizing the dark impulses of the unconscious.
So under literally all of those frameworks, I am not driving the car. The car is driving me.
Yeah.
But what about the pushback? What about the researchers who say human behavior is too weird, we can never map the causes perfectly?
That perspective is called indeterminism. And this is where psychology borrows a massive concept directly from quantum physics, Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
The observer effect.
Exactly. Heisenberg proved that in quantum physics, the very act of observing an electron fundamentally alters its activity. You cannot passively observe something. Observation is an interaction. Applied to the mind, this is devastating. It means that the moment you take a human subject out of their natural environment and put them in a sterile, highly controlled lab to observe them, you have fundamentally changed their natural behavior.
Just by watching them.
The artificial environment, the knowledge of being watched, it all alters the mind. The act of observation is an insurmountable, confounding variable.
Meaning, we can never truly capture pure causality because our fingerprints are instantly all over the crime scene the second we open the door to look at it.
Precisely. And then, standing in total opposition to all of this, you have non-determinism. This is the humanistic, existential belief in absolute free will.
So we do have a choice.
Psychologists in this camp argue that humans freely choose courses of action completely independent of physical or psychical causal chains. You are the sole author of your actions, and because you are the author, you are wholly and morally responsible for them.
But that feels a bit, well, magical, doesn't it? To say we are completely untethered from our biology or our past traumas?
It does feel magical to the hard scientists, which is why the philosopher William James tried to broker a desperate compromise. He divided the concept into hard determinism and soft determinism.
Tell us the difference.
Hard determinism is the cold, mechanistic view where free will is a total illusion and therefore personal responsibility is logically meaningless. If a clock strikes 12, you don't blame the hands, you blame the gears.
But how does soft determinism fix that?
Soft determinism posits that, yes, our behavior is heavily governed by antecedent conditions, genetics, and environment. We are dealt a very specific hand of cards.
Okay.
However, soft determinism argues that uniquely human cognitive processes, like our conscious intentions, our personal values, and our rational deliberation, can intervene dynamically between the external stimulus and our final response.
So if the environment throws a 90-mile-an-hour fastball at my head, hard determinism says I will reflexively duck because of evolution.
Right.
Soft determinism says I process the pitch, realize it's a game, calculate my options, and choose how to swing the bat or take the hit.
Exactly. It inserts a crucial fraction of a second of conscious deliberation. And this brings us to the next persistent mindfuck of the field. Because free will isn't the only thing we are fighting over, we are equally tormented by the mind-body problem.
Oh, man. This is the big one. Monism versus dualism. Let's get into it, because this completely breaks how we view our own existence.
Monism asserts a very simple premise. There is only one fundamental reality in the universe. If you are a materialist, you believe absolutely everything, including your deepest thoughts, your love for your family, your sense of self, is just physical matter and brain chemistry.
We are just meat reacting to electricity.
Exactly. Alternatively, if you are an idealist, you believe everything is ultimately mental, a construct of consciousness, and the physical world is an illusion.
But dualism argues that both exist. There is physical meat and there is immaterial consciousness. But the nightmare of dualism is explaining how they actually talk to each other, right?
That is the interaction problem. If the mind is an immaterial ghost, how the hell does it push the physical levers of my body to make my hand raise? You have theories like emergentism, which argues that complex mental states organically emerge from physical brain processes, much like smoke emerges from a fire.
Right.
But then, incredibly, those emergent mental states can somehow exert top-down causal control back onto the brain.
Wait, the smoke can somehow control the fire.
Yes, which defies traditional physics. Then you have the deeply depressing view of epiphenomenalism.
This one messes with me. Break down epiphenomenalism for the listener.
Epiphenomenalism completely strips consciousness of its power. It argues that the brain's physical processes cause mental states, but those mental states have zero actual power to cause anything in return. Consciousness is just a completely non-causal byproduct.
It's the exhaust fume of an engine. The engine runs, the exhaust comes out. The exhaust is undeniably there. You can see it and smell it, but the exhaust is not turning the wheels.
Exactly right.
So if I accidentally touch a hot stove, I yank my hand back and I feel intense pain. Epiphenomenalism says my physical nervous system entirely controlled the reflex of pulling the hand back, and the conscious feeling of pain happened a millisecond later, doing absolutely nothing.
It's just observing.
My consciousness is just trapped in the passenger seat, watching the meat machine drive, falsely believing it has the steering wheel.
It is a terrifying philosophical proposition, and alongside the mind-body problem, the field wrestles with objective versus subjective reality. Is what you perceive actually what is out there? This is the debate over naive realism.
It just keeps going.
It really does. We debate rational versus irrational drivers. Do logic and reason dictate our actions? Or are we blindly dragged around by unconscious evolutionary impulses? We have the classic nature versus nurture debate. And crucially, we have the immense everyday danger of reification.
Reification is huge. So what does this all mean? This is a logical fallacy we commit almost every single day, and it ruins people's lives.
It does. Reification is the tendency to take an incredibly complex, abstract concepts like anxiety, intelligence, depression, or even the self, and mentally transform it into a concrete physical object.
We talk about our mental health as if we were talking about a physical tumor. Someone will say, my anxiety is attacking me today, or I need to fight my depression. We talk about it as if anxiety is a physical organ in our chest that we could surgically remove if we just had a sharp enough scalpel.
Yes, exactly.
But anxiety isn't a thing. It is an incredibly complex, abstract linguistic categorization we use to describe thousands of transient, overlapping physiological and psychological states, sweaty palms, racing heart, intrusive thoughts. When you reify it, you turn a complex state of being into an invincible enemy sitting in the room with you.
That is the danger of words. If we connect this to the bigger picture, all of these unresolved questions, determinism, the mind-body problem, reification, they highlight exactly why psychology isn't actually one discipline. It's a Frankenstein's monster of a science.
You have hard neuroscience, which assumes strict biological determinism and materialism, forced to share a university building with humanistic therapy, which relies entirely on non-determinism, free will, and the subjective self. It is a discipline inherently at war with itself.
And to truly understand why we are still having this exact same argument over whether the mind is a physical machine or a magical immaterial soul, we have to travel back in time. We have to go back to the guys who started this fight in the first place, thousands of years ago. We are going to ancient Greece. Welcome to the original matrix.
I love this part. The ancient Greeks laid the foundational parameters for literally everything we've just discussed.
They absolutely did. Before them, explanations for human behavior were largely mythological. The gods made me angry, the spirits made me sick. But the early Greek philosophers were searching for the physis, the fundamental primary substance of the universe. They were looking for natural laws. And Plato is where the epistemological mindfuck really begins.
Plato was heavily influenced by the Pythagorean math cults, right? Which sounds like an oxymoron, a math cult, but they literally worship numbers.
They did. The Pythagoreans believed mathematics was the divine hidden language of the universe. They observed that musical harmony relied on exact mathematical ratios. They observed geometry in nature. Plato took that obsession with perfect numbers and expanded it into a total philosophy of reality, the theory of forms.
How does the theory of forms work?
Plato posited that the physical world, everything you can currently touch, taste, smell, and see, is essentially an illusion. It is a flawed, decaying, impermanent shadow realm.
So it's fake.
Basically. The ultimate true reality consists of abstract, eternal, perfect ideas, which he called forms. And these forms exist in a separate, independent realm.
The easiest way to grasp this is the allegory of the cave. Walk us through it.
Imagine a dark, damp cave. Deep inside, prisoners have been chained to the floor since birth. They face a blank stone wall. They cannot turn their heads.
Okay, super bleak.
Behind them, out of sight, a fire is burning. And between the fire and the prisoners, people are carrying various physical objects, statues of animals, plants, tools. The fire casts the shadows of these objects onto the blank wall in front of the prisoners.
And that's all they can see.
Right. Because the prisoners have never known anything else, they look at those flickering, distorted shadows and believe that is true reality.
He is literally the original author of The Matrix.
Yeah.
He is telling humanity that our entire sensory reality, our beautiful sunsets, our physical bodies, is just a cheap, low-res simulation. The shadows on the wall, the real world is hidden from us.
Exactly. The physical world is the shadows. The realm of forms is the real objects outside the cave. And to access that real world, Plato argued you have to actively turn away from your corrupting senses entirely.
You can't trust your eyes.
You cannot trust your eyes or ears. He championed the reminiscence theory of knowledge. Plato believed that your immortal, immaterial soul dwelt in that perfect realm of forms before you were born. Therefore, all learning in this physical life is not discovering anything new. It is simply your soul remembering what it already perfectly knew before it was tragically trapped in a decaying meat body. You achieve this not by observing the world, but through deep, abstract, inward introspection.
But then Aristotle steps into the ring. And Aristotle was Plato's star pupil, studying under him for decades. But he essentially delivered the ultimate empirical clapback to his master.
Aristotle completely rejected Plato's dualism. He thought the idea of a separate magical realm of perfect forms was ridiculous and unnecessary.
He wasn't buying it.
Not at all. Aristotle believed that essences and forms were absolutely real, but they didn't exist in some heavenly, inaccessible dimension. They were embedded directly in physical matter.
Oh, interesting.
If you want to know the absolute essence of a tree, you don't close your eyes, sit in a dark room, and meditate on the abstract mathematical concept of treeness. You get your hands dirty, you walk out into the woods, and you meticulously observe 1,000 actual physical trees until the pattern reveals itself.
So he drags humanity's focus out of the clouds and grounds it back in observable reality.
He does, and he organizes that physical reality through teleology. Aristotle believed everything in nature has an entelechy, a built-in, pre-programmed purpose. He arranged the entire universe into a massive hierarchy called the Scala Naturae, the great chain of being.
From the bottom up.
Right. It ranged from formless dirt at the bottom, up to plants, animals, humans, and finally to the unmoved mover, the logical, pure entity that sparked the universe into motion.
And to explain how all this physical stuff actually functioned, he came up with the 4 causes, right? If you want to understand why a thing exists, you have to answer 4 questions.
Yes. The material cause is the physical stuff an object is literally made of. The formal cause is the pattern or shape it takes. The efficient cause is the energy or force that actually transformed the raw matter into the shape. And the final cause is the ultimate purpose or function of the object.
Okay, let's use a marble statue. The material cause is the raw block of marble rock. The formal cause is the shape of the human body it's being carved into. The efficient cause is the sculptor swinging the hammer and chisel, transferring kinetic energy. And the final cause is the purpose to honor a god in a temple.
Perfectly stated. You understand the object entirely. And Aristotle boldly extended this hierarchical structural thinking directly to psychology by categorizing the types of souls living things possess.
Tell me about the souls.
He believed plants have a vegetative soul. Their only functions are growth and reproduction. Animals have a sensitive soul, they grow, but they also feel pain, experience pleasure, and have basic memory of the environment. Humans, however, uniquely possess a rational soul.
Which comes with all the lower functions. We grow and feel pain, but it unlocks high-level intellect.
Right. And Aristotle intricately divided that human cognition. We have passive reason, which simply absorbs raw data from our physical senses. But we also have active reason, which is the higher-level function used to extract the enduring concepts and patterns hidden within that sensory data.
But arguably, his greatest contribution to modern psychology happened when he just sat around and empirically studied his own human memory.
He basically invented the entire foundation of modern behavioral psychology just by paying hyper-close attention to how his own thoughts chained together.
He documented the laws of association. These are still taught today. Let's go through them. The law of contiguity. We naturally associate things that happen close together in time and space.
Stop on contiguity for a second. This is huge.
Go ahead.
If you hear a specific pop song and you instantly feel a wave of sadness because it reminds you of a terrible breakup from 10 years ago, the song didn't cause the breakup. But because you heard that song while you were being dumped, your brain chained them together, time and space. That is contiguity, and advertising agencies use it to manipulate us every single day.
Exactly. Then there is the law of contrast. We easily associate opposites, like hot and cold. The law of frequency. The more often two things happen together, the stronger the mental link becomes. And the law of similarity. These rules of association laid the absolute bedrock for the learning theories, conditioning, and behaviorism that would completely dominate psychology over 2,000 years later.
So Aristotle was an absolute genius, laying down a rigorous groundwork for empirical observation. He gave us the tools to actually study the physical world.
But then history takes a massive, depressing detour.
It really does.
Because the Catholic Church eventually gets a hold of Aristotle's translated works, and they don't treat it as a fluid, evolving scientific methodology.
No. Over centuries, medieval scholars wove Aristotle's philosophy tightly and flawlessly into Catholic theology. It became a closed, static, impenetrable system known as scholasticism.
And from the perspective of the thinkers who came later, this was catastrophic.
To the Renaissance humanists looking back, it felt like intellectual suffocation. Questioning Aristotle essentially became equivalent to questioning God.
Wow. That's a lot of pressure.
Because Aristotle's teleology, the idea that everything has a divine purpose, fit perfectly with Christian creationism, the system locked down. For the humanists, it felt as though humanity's intellectual progress essentially stalled out for a millennium in Europe. The answers were already written, you just had to read the approved texts.
Until a spectacularly violent, world-altering event accidentally woke everyone up. The Crusades.
It is one of history's great, dark ironies. The Crusades were bloody, protracted, religiously motivated military campaigns. But the massive unintended consequence of sending thousands of Europeans into the Middle East was that it forced isolated, dogmatic European cultures out of their bubbles.
They saw the rest of the world.
They were violently exposed to incredibly advanced Islamic scholars, entirely new architectures, different ways of living, and crucially, they encountered the preserved, untampered classical texts of Greek and Roman antiquity.
The Islamic scholars had saved the original texts while Europe was in the Dark Ages.
Yes, and when those raw, untampered texts flooded back into Europe, it blew the minds of the scholars. It completely shattered their narrow, highly controlled worldview. They realized the ancients knew so much more than the church had allowed them to read.
And that sudden influx of lost knowledge sparks the Renaissance.
Exactly, the rebirth. And the prevailing philosophy of this explosive era becomes Renaissance humanism. It was a visceral, violent pivot away from medieval scholasticism.
What were the pillars of that?
Humanism rested on four main pillars: an intense belief in extreme individualism and untapped human potential, a deep desire for a personal, direct relationship with God without the oppressive middlemen of the Catholic clergy, a passionate obsession with pure, ancient classical wisdom, and a profound hatred for the rigid, dogmatized version of Aristotle that the church had mandated.
Who were the historical figures actually leading this intellectual rebellion? Because they were literally risking their lives.
You start with Petrarch, often called the father of the Renaissance, who passionately begged scholars to ditch abstract religious dogma and focus on tangible human achievement in classical literature. You have Pico, who wrote the Oration on the Dignity of Man, arguing that humans aren't just static, locked links in a great chain of being. We have the divine rational capacity to choose our own destiny and shape our own nature.
Breaking the chain.
Exactly. You have Martin Luther, who was so profoundly disgusted by the moral and financial corruption of the church that he launched the Reformation, literally fracturing the church's monopoly on European thought. And then you have Erasmus.
I want to spend time on Erasmus because I relate to him so deeply. He wrote a brilliant scathing satire called The Praise of Folly.
He did. Erasmus was highly critical of the overly complex, hyper-abstract scholasticism of his time. In his satire, he argued that all this intense, abstract intellectualism doesn't actually help humans live better, more moral lives. In fact, he suggested the exact opposite.
And that makes it worse.
He argued that abstract thinking just allows the human mind to conceive of terrifying, imaginary things. Ghosts, demons, theological paradoxes, existential anxieties. He essentially argued that the simple and the ignorant might actually be happier because they literally lack the mental capacity to invent invisible things to be terrified of.
Which is incredibly painfully prescient. Look at us today. Our advanced, abstract, hyper-connected modern brains are constantly inventing new invisible things to be paralyzed by.
Oh, absolutely.
We have existential dread, we have social media FOMO, we have imposter syndrome, we have climate anxiety. We are tortured by abstractions that do not physically exist in the room with us. Erasmus called it out centuries ago. Sometimes ignorance really does look like bliss.
It's a profound psychological observation about the burden of cognition. But the man who truly broke the philosophical world during the Renaissance was Michel de Montaigne. He completely reinvented the essay as a literary form to unleash a philosophy of extreme, paralyzing skepticism.
Montaigne is the patron saint of overthinkers. What exactly was he so skeptical of?
Everything. Absolutely everything. Montaigne looked at the sheer diversity of human belief across the globe, the obvious biological flaws in our sensory perception, and the intense cultural biases we all inherit from birth. And he concluded that the concept of objective universal truth is essentially a fairy tale.
We can't know anything.
He argued that human rationality is so deeply flawed, so easily manipulated by emotion and culture, that we can never truly know anything for certain. We are just stumbling around in a thick fog of cultural relativity and sensory illusion.
He drops an intellectual nuke on Europe. Think of the psychological impact of this. If we can't trust the church anymore, and we can't trust Aristotle's science anymore, and according to Montaigne, we can't even trust our own fucking eyes, where does that leave humanity?
It left European intellectuals in a state of sheer existential vertigo. But Montaigne's extreme skepticism acted as a massive, necessary intellectual stimulant. It was so completely destabilizing, so deeply terrifying that the next generation of thinkers realized they had to invent rigorous, bulletproof new sciences just to prove Montaigne wrong.
To find some solid ground.
They had to find a way to secure human knowledge against that bottomless abyss of doubt.
And as if Montaigne breaking human perception wasn't terrifying enough, right on the heels of that, astronomers literally ripped the Earth out of the center of the universe. Welcome to the scientific revolution.
For over 1,000 years, the Ptolemaic system ruled human thought. This was the geocentric theory. The Earth is dead center, immovable, and all the planets, the sun, and the stars revolve around us. And it survived for a millennium because it made perfect, intuitive common sense.
It does. The ground beneath you doesn't feel like it's hurtling through space at thousands of miles an hour. And when you look up, the sun physically arcs across the sky.
Exactly. Our senses confirm it. And crucially, it matched Christian theology perfectly. Humanity is God's special, ultimate creation, so obviously he placed us exactly at the physical center of the cosmic stage.
But then, Copernicus steps up to the telescope.
Well, he steps up to the mathematics. Copernicus resurrects an ancient, suppressed idea from the Greek astronomer Aristarchus, the heliocentric theory. The sun is the center, and the Earth is just another mundane planet orbiting it. But what's fascinating about the history of science here is that initially, the Copernican model didn't actually make better, more accurate predictions than the old Ptolemaic model.
Wait, really? So why did anyone adopt it if the data wasn't better?
Because of pure mathematical elegance. To make the Earth-centric model work, ancient astronomers had to invent all these wildly complex, clunky mathematical workarounds, epicycles within epicycles to explain why planets sometimes look like they were moving backwards.
Just adding duct tape to the theory.
Yes. The Copernican model appealed intensely to Pythagorean and Platonic thinkers who deeply believed the universe must be governed by perfect, hidden, simple mathematical harmony. Copernicus stripped away the ugly, complex math and presented something aesthetically beautiful.
But the math still wasn't perfect, right?
No, because Copernicus insisted the planets moved in perfect circles. Kepler had to come along and fix it. Kepler realized the flaw wasn't putting the sun in the center. The flaw was the circle. When Kepler mathematically stretched those perfect circles into over as ellipses, suddenly the mathematics locked in perfectly with what astronomers were actually observing. He proved the heavens operated on measurable, predictable dynamics, not divine magic.
But this transition wasn't just a polite academic debate in a university hall. There was a massive blood price for this science.
There was. The church recognized the profound existential threat this posed to their authority and their theology. Giordano Bruno is the prime tragic example.
What happened to him?
Bruno synthesized heliocentrism with ancient Hermetic philosophy and took it a massive step further. He boldly proposed that the universe is not a closed sphere. It is infinite, containing innumerable suns, countless planets, and possibly other life. This completely and utterly decentralized humanity. We weren't the center of the stage. We were a speck of dust in an infinite void. And for that profound heresy, the Roman Inquisition burned him alive at the stake.
I want you, the listener, to try to imagine the sheer existential terror of living in the 16th century during this shift. You wake up one day, and rogue scientists are telling you that everything you feel in your body is a lie. The ground is moving. You aren't the center of God's creation, and you are actually just hurtling through an infinite, cold, black void. It is the ultimate psychological mindfuck.
And Galileo made that mindfuck undeniable. He took the newly invented telescope, pointed it at the sky, and provided a devastating empirical visual evidence. He saw mountains on the moon. He saw moons orbiting Jupiter. The Earth was not unique. But Galileo is a highly complex figure when it comes to psychology.
Because of his math obsession. Right?
Yes. While his astronomy was revolutionary, his philosophy arguably doomed our field for centuries.
How so?
Galileo was deeply Pythagorean. He believed math was the pure, uncorrupted language of reality. Because of this, he drew a massive philosophical line in the sand. He divided reality into primary qualities and secondary qualities.
Define those.
Primary qualities are objective, physical, measurable properties: shape, size, motion, mass. That is the domain of true science. Secondary qualities are purely subjective conscious experiences: color, taste, pain, emotional states, auditory tones.
So because consciousness is made entirely of secondary qualities, you can't put it in a mathematical equation.
Exactly. Galileo explicitly argued that a rigorous science of conscious experience was an absolute impossibility. He essentially locked the mind out of the scientific revolution. And then Isaac Newton comes along and puts the final glorious nail in the coffin of the medieval worldview.
Newton synthesizes everything.
He takes Kepler's planetary laws, he takes Galileo's terrestrial physics, and he unites them with the universal law of gravitation.
He proved the exact same invisible force of gravity that makes an apple fall from a tree on Earth is the exact same gravity that holds Jupiter in its massive orbit.
Yes. The universe is governed by absolute, universal physical laws. This popularizes a worldview known as deism. Deism is the belief that God is the great ultimate clockmaker. He built a perfect, mathematically precise, mechanical universe, wound it up, and then walked away.
He doesn't intervene anymore.
He does not intervene. There are no miracles. There is no Aristotelian teleology, no hidden divine purpose imbued in nature. It is just cold, blind, mechanical cause and effect ticking away in the dark.
Which raises an incredibly important question. If the entire universe operates like a cold, dead, mechanical clock, where the hell does human emotion, art, meaning, and consciousness fit into the gears? Are we just cogs?
That is the crisis of the modern age. And to figure out our place in this terrifying new clockwork universe and to finally defeat Montaigne's paralyzing skepticism, two philosophical titans took the stage. They went in completely opposite directions, and in doing so, they birthed the two distinct halves of modern psychology. I'm talking about Francis Bacon and René Descartes.
The ultimate epistemological showdown. The empiricist versus the rationalist. Let's start with Bacon.
Francis Bacon was the radical empiricist. He demanded strict inductive reasoning. This is a massive departure from the past. Induction means you do not start with a grand theory. You do not start with a theological assumption. You start by blindly gathering massive amounts of individual, observable data points.
Just pure data.
You run experiments, you record the raw data,
Okay.
and only when you have an overwhelming pile of empirical evidence do you slowly induce a general principle. He laid the foundation for positivism, the strict belief that science should only ever study what can be publicly, directly experienced.
But Bacon wasn't naive. He knew that human beings are fundamentally flawed observers. He knew we naturally fuck up the data with our biases.
He did. He famously identified the 4 idols that constantly corrupt human perception and distract us from objective truth. A true scientist has to battle these idols constantly. First, you have the idols of the cave. These are personal, individual biases. Your unique upbringing, your specific education, your personal traumas, they act like a dark cave that distorts how you see the light of reality.
So a researcher has to actively strip away their personal history to interpret data objectively.
Exactly.
So if I'm raised in a deeply suspicious environment, my cave makes me interpret neutral data as a threat. What's the second idol?
The idols of the tribe. These are biases inherent in human nature itself. Our biological sensory systems naturally distort reality. We have an evolutionary tendency to see patterns that don't actually exist, to imagine false order in random chaos, and to let our hopes blind us to cold facts.
Like seeing faces in the clouds.
Exactly. Think of modern experimenter effects, where a scientist unconsciously nudges the data or misinterprets a result simply because they so desperately want their hypothesis to be true.
Third, and this is without a doubt my favorite, the idols of the marketplace.
This refers to the profound errors and misunderstandings that result from the limitations, sloppiness, and ambiguities of human language.
I think about the idols of the marketplace every single time I see modern internet discourse. We completely lose our minds arguing over semantics. 2 people will violently scream at each other on social media, ready to go to war, completely missing the fact that they actually agree on the underlying concept.
Oh, happens all the time.
But because language is just an incredibly sloppy, imprecise tool for transferring complex, abstract ideas, they use words differently.
Right.
Someone uses the word freedom, someone else uses security, and they fight to the death over definitions. We are trapped by the ambiguity of our own words.
Absolutely. The marketplace of human interaction corrupts the truth, which is exactly why modern psychological science is obsessed with strict operational definitions, defining exactly how a variable is measured to avoid that linguistic trap. Finally, Bacon warned against the idols of the theater.
The theater.
This is the blind, uncritical adherence to grand philosophical dogmas, religious authority, or established scientific paradigms. It's allowing the dominant cultural narrative to prevent you from seeing the raw truth right in front of your eyes.
So how did Bacon propose we actually do science once we manage to slay the 4 idols?
He advocated for 2 distinct types of experiments to push humanity forward. First, experimenta lucifera, or experiments of light. These are basic science experiments designed purely to discover the fundamental causal laws of nature, just to understand how the machine works.
And the second?
Second, experimenta fructifera, or experiments of fruit. These are applied sciences taking those discovered natural laws and practically applying them to invent technology and improve the human condition.
So Bacon wants to build human knowledge slowly, from the dirt up, using pure, observable data. But Descartes goes the complete opposite way. He starts in the clouds.
René Descartes is the father of modern rationalism. He looked at Montaigne's terrifying skepticism and realized that you couldn't defeat it by just gathering more data, because Montaigne proved our senses gathering that data are flawed.
Right.
Descartes realized the only way to defeat skepticism was to lean entirely into it. He utilized radical systemic doubt.
Put us in the room with him. How extreme was this doubt?
He essentially locked himself in an oven-heated room, sat by the fire, and decided to systematically doubt the existence of absolutely everything in the universe. He doubted what he had read in books, he doubted his religious teachings, he stared at the wax melting by the fire, and doubted his own sensory perception of it.
Wow. He doubted his own eyes.
He even doubted his own physical body, considering the terrifying philosophical possibility that a supremely powerful, malicious demon was just feeding his isolated brain perfectly rendered illusions of a physical world.
She stripped away the entire universe. He burned it all down until he hit absolute rock bottom.
And at rock bottom, trapped in the void, he found the one undeniable, indubitable truth. He realized that even if the entire universe is a complete illusion, even if his body doesn't exist, and even if a demon is tricking him, there is an entity doing the doubting.
Right.
There is a consciousness actively thinking. The very act of doubting proves his existence. Hence, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
It gives me chills every time. From that single microscopic spark of absolute certainty, he rebuilds reality.
He used pure deduction. Unlike Bacon's data-gathering induction, Descartes started with an undeniable premise and logically, mathematically deduced the existence of God and then deduced the reality of the rest of the physical universe.
And what did he say about where ideas come from?
Furthermore, he resurrected the idea of innate ideas. He argued that concepts like perfection, geometry, and infinity are not derived from messy sensory experience, but are implanted directly into the human mind by God.
But his biggest impact on psychology was how he viewed the body, right? Because he fully embraced Newton's mechanical clockwork universe for biology.
He did. Descartes theorized that the physical bodies of animals and the physical bodies of humans are basically just wet automatons. They are intricate biological machines driven entirely by mechanical reflexes. He hypothesized that animal spirits, these subtle, invisible fluids, flowed through hollow nerve tubes in the body.
Like hydraulics.
Exactly. When you touch a fire, the heat pulls a thread, opening a pore in the brain, releasing the animal spirits to flow down to the muscle and mechanically pull the hand away.
But humans aren't just machines to him. Animals are machines, but humans are special.
Right, and this is where he champions interactionism. Descartes argued that humans uniquely possess an immaterial, rational mind, the ghost in the machine. But again, how does the immaterial ghost interact with the wet machine?
The interaction problem again.
Exactly. Descartes localized this profound collision in a tiny structure in the center of the brain, the pineal gland. He believed that was the exact physical threshold where the magical mind nudged the animal spirits to direct the mechanical body.
So, synthesizing these two titans, Bacon essentially paved the way for hard behaviorism, demanding empirical, observable data and violently rejecting invisible theories, while Descartes legitimized both physiological psychology by treating the body as a measurable machine and cognitive psychology by validating the introspective focus on the subjective mind.
Precisely. Bacon and Descartes established the divergent, often conflicting tracks that modern psychology is still running on today.
Which brings our massive journey to a close. We set out to trace the evolution of the mind, to answer if psychology is a pristine science. And what we found is that modern psychology is definitely not a clean, unified medical science.
Not even close.
It is a chaotic, violently beautiful, multi-paradigmatic synthesis of history. When you sit on that therapist's couch, you are participating in a tradition that spans thousands of years. You are standing on the shoulders of ancient Greek mathematical mystics who thought the world was a shadow, Renaissance rebels who shattered religious dogmas to reclaim human potential, and Enlightenment mechanics who meticulously mapped the clockwork universe.
It's all there in the room with you.
We are still arguing about free will, we are still trying to bridge the immaterial mind and the physical meat of the brain, and we are still struggling every single day to peer through the biases and idols that distort our vision.
The profound questions haven't changed in 2,000 years. We just have much more sophisticated, expensive tools for arguing about them.
And I want to leave you listening right now with one final lingering mindfuck. We talked about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle applied to psychology, the terrifying idea that the act of observing a thing fundamentally changes the thing you are observing.
Yes, the observer effect.
I want you to think about that the next time you engage in deep introspection, the next time you try to look inward to figure out why you are sad or what you truly want out of life. Every single time you try to observe your own thoughts to understand who you truly are, you are introducing the ultimate confounding variable. By the very act of looking inward, by focusing your intense attention on a fragile feeling or an old memory, you are fundamentally altering the psychological state you are trying to observe.
That is the inescapable paradox.
So the question is, are you ever truly seeing your authentic natural self? Or are you only ever seeing the ripples you made by dropping a stone into the water to look at it?
It's a haunting thought.
Keep questioning your reality, keep looking for the strings that move you, and we will see you on the next deep dive.